The morning mist clung to the coastal village of Saltmere like a secret, and Marina moved through it with practiced invisibility. 7 years had taught her the precise angle to hold her shoulders, the exact pace that appeared unhurried yet purposeful, the careful modulation of her voice to sound like she had always belonged to the land. In her cottage at the village's edge, where the scent of brine could still kiss her skin each dawn, she ground kelp and sea urchin spines into powder, while Kai slept fitfully in the loft above. The boy's nightmares had grown worse these past weeks. She could hear him thrashing now, caught in dreams of drowning that weren't quite dreams, and weren't quite memories. Marina abandoned her mortar and climbed the wooden ladder with movements that still felt wrong after all these years. Too deliberate, too conscious of gravity. She found Kai tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, his small face contorted with terror, lips forming wordless sounds that resembled the underwater language she once spoke fluently. "Shh, little Pearl," she whispered, gathering him against her chest. The lullaby came unbidden, notes that had no human equivalent rising from somewhere deeper than her throat. Kai's breathing steadied, his fingers clutching at her sleeve as if she were driftwood in a storm. She held him until dawn broke properly, watching the sun paint the sea gold through their single window, and tried not to think about how his hair caught the light exactly like his had. That night she'd forced herself to forget. The village trusted Marina as their healer, though none could say precisely when she'd arrived. She had appeared one storm-racked morning with a half-drowned child, and a talent for curing ailments that confounded even the traveling physicians. The fishermen's wives sought her for their husbands' persistent coughs. Mothers brought children with fevers that wouldn't break, and she helped them all with combinations of common herbs and mysterious ingredients she claimed to trade for with passing merchants. No one questioned why these merchants only came during the new moon, or why Marina's supplies smelled so deeply of the deep ocean rather than any forest or field. It was market day when everything began to unravel. Marina had ventured into the village square with Kai, who needed new boots. His feet seemed to grow with the tides, rapid and relentless. She was examining the cobbler's work when the crowd's energy shifted, conversations dying like wind before a storm. The king's banner appeared first, crimson with a black wolf rampant, followed by riders in dark leather and steel. But it was the man at their head who made Marina's knees buckle. Alpha King Theron moved through the crowd like deep water, powerful and inevitable. She knew that face, though she couldn't say how. The sharp plane softened only by eyes the color of storm clouds, the way he held his head as if constantly scenting the wind. Her body betrayed her with pain she hadn't felt in years, phantom aches along her legs where scales once caught moonlight, a burning in her lungs as if they remembered breathing water. She pulled Kai behind a merchant's stall, but the boy resisted, drawn toward the procession with disturbing intensity. "He feels familiar," Kai whispered, and Marina's heart cracked like ice. The king addressed the village elder, his voice carrying despite its low pitch. He sought his heir, lost at sea 3 years past, when a diplomatic vessel had foundered in a sudden squall. Signs and portents suggested the child lived, somewhere along this stretch of coast. Every settlement would be searched, every child of appropriate age examined. Marina calculated rapidly. Kai appeared perhaps 6 or 7, small for his true age, which she had never been entirely certain of anyway. The timing was wrong, the story didn't fit, and yet her every instinct screamed danger. She attempted to slip away, but the crowd pressed close, eager for spectacle. Theron had begun examining the village children, speaking gently to each, showing them a medallion on a chain. Most touched it without consequence, but when young Tom, the baker's son, handled it, Kai whimpered and pressed his face into Marina's skirts. She felt him trembling, caught in the grip of something beyond normal fear. "The healer," someone said. Marina couldn't identify who. "She has a boy." Theron's gaze found them across the square, and Marina felt it like physical touch. He approached with measured steps, and she saw the moment he truly looked at her, saw his pupils dilate and his nostrils flare as if catching an impossible scent. Up close, the familiarity was overwhelming. Her body remembered things her mind had surrendered, the texture of his skin beneath her fingers, the sound he made when pulled from death's embrace, the weight of promises exchanged in a language that predated words. "Your son?" Theron asked, though his eyes never left Marina's face. "Yes," she lied, with truth's conviction, because Kai was hers in every way that mattered. May I? He held out the medallion toward Kai, who had emerged slightly from behind her skirts. The moment the boy's fingers brushed the golden surface, 3 things happened simultaneously. Kai screamed with the voice of drowning sailors. Marina's carefully maintained human appearance flickered for just an instant, showing something else beneath, and Theron took an involuntary step back, his hand moving to his throat as if remembering something crucial. That night, the storm arrived as if summoned. Marina stood at the cottage door, watching the sea rage, knowing Theron's men would come with questions she couldn't answer. Kai sat by the fire, unusually quiet, drawing patterns in the ash that looked disturbing, like royal sigils crossed with oceanic runes. "She's drowning," Kai said suddenly, and Marina's blood froze. Before she could respond, he was running toward the beach. She followed, her human gait abandoning all pretense of normalcy as she raced after him through the rain. At the shoreline, a child struggled in the vicious surf, the blacksmith's daughter, pulled out by a riptide while checking crab pots. Marina didn't hesitate. She dove into waters that would kill a human within minutes, her body remembering movements it had supposedly forgotten. She reached the girl in heartbeats, pulled her to safety with strength that belonged to no land-dwelling woman. But as she emerged from the waves, dragging the child onto the sand, she found Theron standing there, having followed the commotion. Their eyes met across the rescued girl's gasping form. Marina knew he had seen her hold her breath far too long, move through the water with impossible grace. She waited for accusation, for recognition, for the world she'd built to crumble. Instead, he knelt beside her, helping to turn the child so she could expel seawater. "Thank you," he said quietly, but his eyes held questions that would not stay unasked much longer. As Marina felt the phantom pain of her lost tale burn worse than ever, she knew the truth she'd buried beneath 7 years of careful performance was about to surface, bringing with it memories that might destroy them all. Theron extended his stay in Saltmere, under the pretense of investigating storm damage to the coastal roads, but Marina knew better. She felt his attention like pressure changes before a squall, constant and inescapable. He visited her cottage requesting treatments for invented ailments, a shoulder strain from riding, headaches from the sea air, and each time he came, the very walls seemed to pulse with unspoken recognition. Marina prepared his tinctures with trembling hands, adding ingredients no human healer would know: essence of abyssal kelp, powdered pearls from depths where light never reached, drops of her own tears that sizzled when they hit the mixture. "Your methods are unusual," Theron observed on his 4th visit, watching her work with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. "This knowledge doesn't come from any healing school I know." "My grandmother," Marina lied smoothly, though the word tasted like sand. "She lived by the sea all her life. And your son's father?" The question dropped between them like a stone into still water. "Dead." The truth of it scraped her throat, for the man who had loved her that night was indeed gone, transformed into this king who wore his face, but carried no memory of promises made in foam and starlight. Kai, meanwhile, had begun displaying disturbing changes. He would stand at the shore for hours, conducting conversations with the waves in languages Marina had never taught him. His drawings grew more elaborate, architectural diagrams of underwater palaces he'd never seen, portraits of beings with features that shifted between human and marine. Most unnervingly, he had begun to predict the tides with perfect accuracy, down to the minute. "Mother," he said one evening. He'd never called her that before. Always, Marina. "Why does the king's blood sing the same song as mine?" She couldn't answer, but that night, her dreams provided what waking memory wouldn't. She found herself pulled into visions that felt more like recollection. Theron, younger, struggling in black water as his ship burned above him, her true form cutting through the waves, tail powerful and iridescent, reaching him just as his lungs surrendered their last air. The kiss that was meant only to breathe life back into him, but became something more when she tasted royal alpha blood mixed with seawater. The ancient magic recognizing what her conscious mind hadn't. Here was a mate worthy of a sea queen's daughter. She woke gasping, her legs cramping with agony that felt like transformation in reverse. Beside her bed stood Kai, his eyes reflecting light like a cat's, or like a creature of the depths. "You dream too loud," he said simply. So does he. The next morning, Theron arrived unannounced, his face haggard with exhaustion. "I've been having visions," he said without preamble. Impossible memories of drowning, of being saved by something, someone, that couldn't exist. And in these dreams, there's always singing, the same melody you hum when you think no one's listening. Marina's careful control finally cracked. She felt the scales she'd hidden beneath an illusion of skin begin to shimmer at her wrists, along her neck. "You should leave Saltmere, Your Majesty. Take your men and go." Not without answers. He stepped closer, and she could smell the truth on him. Salt and sovereignty, power and pain. Not without understanding why looking at you feels like remembering how to breathe. That evening, the full moon rose like an accusation. Marina felt its pull in her bones, the same call that had once drawn her to dance in the shallows where land met sea. She tried to resist, but her body betrayed her, walking without her permission toward the beach. She found Theron already there, drawn by the same inexorable force, and Kai sitting on a rock between them like a small, solemn judge. "Tell them," Kai commanded, and his voice carried an authority no child should possess. "Tell them what the water remembers." The moon's light seemed to solidify around them, creating a circle that existed outside normal time. Marina felt her carefully maintained human form begin to dissolve, scales erupting along her arms, her neck, webbing appearing between her fingers. But instead of her tail returning, her legs remained, twisted into a horrible parody of what she had been, neither human nor mer, but something caught agonizingly between. Theron made a sound like breaking, and suddenly she saw recognition flood his eyes, not just of her, but of everything. The dam holding back his memories shattered. He fell to his knees in the sand, overwhelmed by the return of that night 7 years ago, how she had saved him from an assassination attempt disguised as a storm, how they had loved with desperate intensity knowing the dawn would separate them, how she had sung a forgetting into his mind to protect him from those who would use their bond for political destruction. "You gave up your immortality," he whispered, understanding at last why she was dying. "When you saved me, when we—" His eyes moved to Kai, seeing the truth written in the boy's features. "He's mine, ours. The sea demands a price for everything," Marina managed through gritted teeth as another wave of pain crashed through her. "I could save you or keep my nature, not both. And when I carried him, I couldn't return to the water. He belongs to both worlds, so I could belong to neither." Kai stood, moving to stand between his parents with otherworldly grace. "The curse is breaking you," he said to Marina, then turned to Theron. "And it's breaking because you remember. She tied your forgetting to her survival. As long as you didn't know, she could pretend to be human. But now—" Marina collapsed, her body convulsing as it tried to remember a form it no longer possessed. Theron caught her, and where his hands touched her skin, she felt fire and ice. Transformation trying and failing to complete itself. Through the haze of agony, she heard him saying her true name. Not Marina, but something older, deeper, a sound like waves against hidden grottos, and realized he had remembered everything. "There has to be a way," Theron said desperately, holding her as she flickered between forms. "Magic this powerful doesn't just end. It transforms." Kai placed his small hands on both their heads, and Marina felt the child's inherited magic surge through them. Not quite mere song, not quite alpha command, but something entirely new. "The answer isn't in the past you forgot," he said with eerie certainty. "It's in the future you haven't chosen yet." As Marina felt consciousness slipping away, she saw through Kai's power a vision of what could be. Theron standing before his court, abdicating his throne, herself neither dying nor transforming but becoming something unprecedented. And Kai, bridge between worlds, teaching others like them how to exist in the spaces between. But every future came with a price, and as darkness claimed her, she wondered if any of them would be willing to pay it. Theron's voice followed her into unconsciousness, making promises in the mere tongue she'd taught him that night 7 years ago, swearing oaths that would either save them all or doom them to a fate worse than forgetting. The last thing she felt was Kai's hand in hers, anchoring her to a world she no longer fully belonged to, pulling her toward a transformation that had never before been attempted. The moon watched, impassive, as the Alpha King held the dying sea woman, while their impossible child began to sing a new kind of magic into being. Marina existed in a space between breathing and drowning, where time moved like honey through water. She could hear Theron's voice, rough with desperation, ordering his healers to do something, anything, But what could land-dwelling physicians do for a creature whose very nature was unraveling? She felt Kai's small hand in hers, unnaturally steady, and through their touch came visions that weren't quite prophecy and weren't quite memory. "She's dying because she's trying to be one thing," Kai said, his child's voice carrying an ancient wisdom that made the healers step back in fear. But she was never meant to be singular. Theron had moved them to the abandoned lighthouse at Saltmere's edge, away from curious eyes. The circular room at its peak had become a makeshift sanctuary where Marina lay suspended between forms, her body a constant flux of scales and skin, lungs that couldn't decide whether to process air or water. He hadn't left her side in 3 days, and she could feel his anguish like a physical thing, alpha power crackling around him in waves that made even his own guards nervous. "Your Majesty," his advisor, Marcus, ventured on the 4th morning. The kingdom needs nothing from me until this is resolved." Theron cut him off, but Marina heard the deeper truth in his voice. He was preparing to choose, and the weight of that choice was tearing him apart. Through her fevered dreams, she saw flashes of the past that even her forced forgetting hadn't erased. The political machinations that had led to his attempted assassination, the careful plan to drown the idealistic young prince before he could ascend to a throne that powerful forces wanted vacant. She had interfered with more than just one murder that night. She had unraveled a conspiracy that stretched from the merchant guilds to the noble houses, all of whom had assumed the sea would keep their secret. "They're coming," Kai announced suddenly, looking toward the mainland. "The ones who tried to kill you before. They know she's here, and they know what she is." Theron stood slowly, and Marina felt the shift in him, from desperate lover to predatory king. "How many?" "All of them," Kai replied simply. "Lord Blackwater, the merchant princes, even your own cousin who was meant to rule after your death. They've been searching for her ever since you arrived here, knowing that if a mer woman saved you, the old laws would apply." The old laws. Even through her delirium, Marina understood. Ancient treaties written when the world was younger, when the boundary between land and sea was more fluid. If a child of the sea saved royal blood from unnatural death, bonds would form that superseded human politics. The conspirators hadn't just failed to kill Theron, they had accidentally created a claim to the throne that ran deeper than bloodline. "Then we end this properly," Theron said, and Marina heard 7 years of suppressed memory fueling his determination. "Marcus, send word to every loyal house. Tell them their king requires witnesses for a choosing." "A choosing, sire?" Marcus sounded baffled. "That tradition hasn't been invoked in 300 years. Then it's long overdue." As Theron prepared for what was to come, Marina felt Kai crawl beside her on the lighthouse keeper's bed, his small body radiating impossible warmth. "Mother," he whispered, "you need to stop fighting yourself. The sea didn't take your tail as punishment. It gave you legs as a gift. You were never meant to be only one thing. You were meant to be the bridge." Through their joined hands, he showed her visions of others like them. Children born of 2 worlds, beings who existed in the spaces between elements, all waiting for someone to show them it was possible to survive the transformation. She saw herself not as a failed mermaid or false human, but as something entirely new, the first of a kind that could teach others how to navigate the agony of being multiple things at once. "But the pain," she gasped, finding her voice for the first time in days. "Ends when you stop choosing one over the other," Kai said with certainty that belied his years. "Be both. Be neither. Be new." By evening, the lighthouse was surrounded. Lord Blackwater had arrived with enough men to take a small castle, and the other conspirators had brought their own forces. But Theron had been busy too. Loyal houses had sent witnesses, and more surprisingly, the fishing families of Saltmere had come, armed with harpoons and nets, ready to defend their healer who had saved so many of their own. Theron stood at the lighthouse door, crown gleaming in the dying light. "Lord Blackwater," he called out, voice carrying on the wind. "You come to finish what you started 7 years ago?" "We come to prevent an abomination," Blackwater replied, his scarred face twisted with righteous fury. "The creature you harbor threatens the natural order. No mere witch should hold influence over the throne." "She holds no influence," Theron said calmly. "She holds my heart, my son, and my future. There is a difference." "Your son?" The words rippled through the assembled crowd like thrown stones. "You admit to breeding with..." I admit to loving someone who saved my life, bore my child, and sacrificed everything to protect us both from your schemes. Theron interrupted. And I invoke the right of choosing. Gasps rose from even his supporters. The right of choosing was absolute. A monarch could select their path at the cost of their crown, but once chosen, that path was irrevocable. It had been used only 3 times in the kingdom's history, each time reshaping the realm entirely. You would abdicate for a monster? Blackwater sounded genuinely shocked. I would abdicate for the future, Theron corrected. You tried to drown me to prevent change, but the sea itself intervened. I choose to honor that intervention. He pulled the crown from his head, and the moment it left his skin, Marina felt the change like a lightning strike. The magical binding that had been killing her, tied as it was to his royal status, began to unravel. But instead of returning her to what she had been, something else happened. She felt herself transforming, but not into either of her previous forms. Her legs remained but grew stronger, webbing appearing between her toes that could be willed visible or hidden. Her lungs expanded, developing a dual nature that could process both air and water with equal efficiency. Her skin became something that could shift at will, human smooth when needed, scaled for protection when threatened. The pain that had been tearing her apart transformed into power, raw and unprecedented. She rose from the bed, Kai's hand still in hers, and walked to where Theron stood facing their enemies. When she emerged from the lighthouse, gasps and cries rose from the crowd. She was magnificent and terrible, familiar and alien, everything they feared and more than they could imagine. Behold, Kai said, his voice somehow reaching everyone present despite its childish pitch. The first amphibous. Neither mer nor human, but something new, something necessary. This changes nothing, Blackwater snarled, though Marina could smell his fear. Crown or no crown, such creatures cannot be allowed. Cannot be allowed by whose authority? Theron asked mildly. I am no longer king, having chosen my path, but perhaps you should ask the heir what he thinks. All eyes turned to Kai, who stepped forward with preternatural grace. The birthmark on his shoulder, hidden until now, began to glow with soft phosphorescence, the unmistakable mark of royal succession combined with something else, something that made even hardened soldiers step back. I am Kai Theron Pelagios, the boy announced, his voice carrying both human authority and mer-song compulsion. Heir to the throne by blood, heir to the sea by birth, bridge between worlds by nature. And I say that the age of separation ends now. Marina watched her son, their son, transform before their eyes. Not physically, but in presence, authority radiating from him like heat from a forge. He was what she had become through pain and sacrifice, but born to it, comfortable in multiplicity where she had fought it. The conspirators will face judgment, Kai continued, but not for trying to kill a king. You'll answer for trying to maintain a division that the world has outgrown. Every year, more children are born who belong to multiple worlds. Every year, the boundaries you kill to maintain grow thinner. You can evolve or be replaced. You're a child, Blackwater spat. You cannot rule. No, Kai agreed, but they can. He gestured to his parents, Theron, who had sacrificed a crown for love and truth, Marina, who had survived an impossible transformation and emerged as something unprecedented. They will serve as regents, teaching what it means to exist between worlds, until I come of age. And by then, the kingdom will be ready for what comes next. Marina felt Theron's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing with perfect familiarity. Where their skin touched, she felt completion. Not the desperate merge of that night 7 years ago, but something sustainable, something that could last. Will you stand with us? She asked the crowd, her voice carrying both human speech and mer-song harmonics. Will you help build a world where no one has to choose between parts of themselves? The fishing families answered first. Those who had always known the sea held more than fish and storms. Then Theron's loyal houses, seeing opportunity in transformation. Even some of Blackwater's men lowered their weapons, recognizing the futility of fighting the future itself. Blackwater made one last desperate attempt, drawing a blade forged from meteoric iron, one of the few substances that could harm both human and mer flesh. But before he could strike, the sea itself intervened. Water rose from nowhere, salt water in defiance of geography, wrapping around him like living chains. Marina hadn't called it, neither had Kai. The ocean itself had chosen a side. The conspiracy ends here, Theron said quietly. You can accept exile, or you can test whether the sea that saved me will be as merciful to you. One by one, the conspirators laid down their arms. The revolution they had feared had come, but not in the form they expected. Not through violence or conquest, but through transformation, through the simple act of refusing to remain confined to a single nature. As the sun set over Saltmere, Marina stood with her family, strange and impossible and perfect, watching the crowd disperse. Some fled, unable to accept what they had witnessed, but others lingered, especially those who had children who never quite fit, who stood at windows staring at stars or seas with longing they couldn't name. This is just the beginning, Kai said, sounding both ancient and young. They'll come now, all the others who've been hiding what they are. Let them come, Marina replied, feeling strength she hadn't known existed flowing through her transformed body. We'll teach them what we've learned, that breaking doesn't mean broken, that being multiple isn't being less, that sometimes the greatest power comes from surrendering the need to be only one thing. Theron pulled them both closer, and Marina felt the rightness of it, not the desperate passion of that forgotten night, but something deeper, more sustainable. They had all transformed, all chosen to become something unprecedented rather than remain safely singular. The lighthouse beam sparked to life above them, though no one had lit it. But this wasn't its usual yellow flame. It burned blue-green, the color of deep water and shallow tide pools, visible not just to ships, but to things that swam beneath them, a beacon for all those caught between worlds, announcing that they finally had a place to belong. What happens now? Theron asked, though his voice held no uncertainty, only curiosity. Now, Marina said, watching the first tentative figures emerging from the shadows, a girl whose hair moved like kelp, a boy with gills scarring his neck, adults who had spent lifetimes hiding scales or songs, or the ability to breathe in spaces where humans shouldn't survive. Now, we build a kingdom where no one has to choose between their natures. Kai began to sing, not in mere tongue or human speech, but in something new, something that belonged to neither tradition, but drew from both. Others joined him, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The song rose over Saltmere, over the sea, carrying on impossible winds to distant shores where others like them waited, hoped, hid. Marina felt her transformation complete, not the return to what she had been, or the stabilization of a human form, but the acceptance of constant change itself as her nature. She was the tide, neither fully in nor out, but eternally moving between states. And in that movement, in that refusal to be still, she found a power greater than any single form could have contained. The age of separation had ended. The age of synthesis had begun. And in a lighthouse where land met sea, where memory met forgetting, where love had conquered the need for simple categories, a new world was being born, one transformed soul at a time.